Hey guys, so today for analyzing key details, we are talking, or key ideas, excuse me, we are going to be reading a passage on Pavlov's dogs, and then we're going to be answering questions that have to do with the characters or key ideas in the passage. I say characters, but if this isn't literature, but basically who's mentioned in the article, what anecdotes do we know about them, what specific details do we know about them. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to read this passage, Pavlov's dogs, together one time, and then you will read it 2 more times on your own. But we will answer some questions together to get you started. There are 9 questions, it looks like, for us to answer. Okay, let's go back up. Remember, we talked about a 3-read protocol here. A 3-read protocol, remember, the first read, we're just kind of basically finding out what is the passage about. We're not really internalizing any of the information. And then the second read is when we're actually comprehending it. We are understanding and making connections. But the third read is when we can delve into specific details, citing evidence, knowing exactly where something is at in a different paragraph of the passage. So that's why we do a 3-read protocol. Okay, Pavlov's dogs. Psychology is a science of mind and behavior. However, it wasn't until the late 1800s that psychology first became recognized as a science. Before then, there had been a lot of theorizing, but not enough solid evidence to support claims. When theorists shifted their focus to gathering evidence through rigorous experimentation and scientific studies is when they came to be known as real psychologists. Since that time, less than 150 years ago, psychologists have continued to build upon the studies done by fellow psychologists. Just make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Paragraph 2. One influential study that set into motion many subsequent psychological studies about behavior and learning is the Pavlov's dogs study. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist, conducted the study in 1901. Pavlov had already spent years studying the digestive system of dogs and therefore knew that dogs naturally salivate whenever they see food. This is not something dogs learn. It is a normal, involuntary reflex. Saliva is required to begin the process of food digestion. But what he also noticed was that the dogs would salivate whenever they saw or heard something they had repeatedly associated with food delivery in the past. For example, they would salivate when they simply saw the person in the lab coat who normally delivered their food, regardless of whether or not the person was carrying food. And they would salivate when they heard his footsteps coming down the hall. At that point, you could say Pavlov accidentally discovered what would later become known as classical conditioning, or the association of one thing with something unrelated that elicits the same response. But, like the other psychologists of his time, he wanted to scientifically prove his theory. In order to be scientific, Pavlov set up a series of experiments to see whether he could make the dog salivate by using a signal that had no relation to the food or its delivery whatsoever. In his first set of experiments, Pavlov arranged for a ticking sound to occur just a few seconds before the dog's food would appear. Sure enough, within a few days, Pavlov would simply produce the ticking sound to the dog to get the dogs to salivate, even if no food appeared. According to Pavlov, the sound of the metronome is the signal for food, and the animal reacts to the signal in the same way as if it were food. No distinction can be observed between the effects produced on the animal by the sound of the beating metronome and showing real food. The beating metronome is known as a conditioned stimulus. Pavlov did try other stimuli besides the ticking sound of the metronome. For example, he tried introducing the scent of vanilla. An important discovery was that the only time the dog would actually salivate at the sight, sound, or smell of the stimulus was when the stimulus was introduced within a few seconds before the food appeared. If it was introduced afterward or too far in advance, it would not generate the same response. With classical conditioning, you can continue to get your subject to make associations between various stimuli. Once the dog responds to the conditioned stimulus, such as a beating metronome, a secondary stimulus can be introduced. For example, if you pair a ringing bell sound with the sound of the beating metronome, the dog will start to associate the sound of the bell with food. Thus, you could simply ring a bell to get the dog to salivate even without the promise of food. This is why a house cat gets so excited just from hearing the sound of a squeaky pantry door. Okay, now let's go over the questions. I'm going to go ahead and read all the questions out loud, so if we need to reread, we can. Answer the questions using complete, detailed sentences. So that means we are going to be restating the question in our answers. What was happening in the field of psychology at the time Pavlov conducted his study? In what way did Pavlov impact the field of psychology? Pavlov's study was about learning and behavior. Pavlov observed that any object or event which the dogs learned to associate with their food delivery would trigger the same response, which would have naturally occurred in the presence of food. Explain what the dogs learned during this study. Number 4. Why is it important for Pavlov to conduct experiments in this study? Number 5. How did Pavlov's career as a psychologist studying animal digestion lead to a career in psychology studying animal behavior? Some have said that classical conditioning was discovered by accident. In what way was the discovery an accident? Using the procedure Pavlov used, explain step by step the procedure you would use to get a dog to salivate when it hears your favorite song being played without having any food present. Whenever Alexis hears a train, she immediately gets a negative feeling as she thinks back to the time she waved goodbye to her dad, who left on a train and never came back. How can classical conditioning help Alexis not feel so bad every time she hears a train? And the last one, why does a house cat get excited by the sound of a squeaky pantry door? Okay, so there's 9 questions, but you do not have to answer all of them. We're going to answer 2 together today. Okay, we'll do number 1 and number 2. But out of 3 through 9, I would like you guys to choose 4. Let's choose 4. So choose 4 to answer and submit those for your work completion for today. So we're going to do 2 together, and then you're going to do 4 on your own, and then you'll submit all of those. Okay, so let's do number 1 first. What was happening in the field of psychology at the time Pavlov conducted his study? So let's go back up here. It's going to be in the first section. So I'm going to reread because that is a strategy that we do if we don't know the answer right away, we reread. Psychology is the science of mind and behavior. However, it wasn't until the late 1800s that psychology first became recognized as a science. Before then, there had been a lot of theorizing, but not enough solid evidence to support claims. When theorists shifted their focus to gathering evidence through rigorous experimentation and scientific studies, is when they came to be known as real psychologists. Since that time, less than 150 years ago, psychologists have continued to build upon studies done by fellow psychologists. And then it talks about one influential study, Pavlov's dogs by Ivan Pavlov. And then this paragraph talks about how he was or studied the digestive system of dogs and then turned to behavior. Okay, so let me go back to the question. What was happening in the field of psychology at the time Pavlov conducted his study? So let's restate the question. Let me use my text box here. Okay, at the time Pavlov conducted his study, psychology, so this is psychology wasn't necessarily a science yet, so it was just being transitioned over to a science. And Pavlov helped to do that because of his experiments. Psychology wasn't considered a science period, but Pavlov helped to change this through his experiments with behavior. There we go. So I restated the question and answered the question. Okay, in what way did Pavlov impact the field of psychology? So let's go back up. I did not read paragraph 2 and 3. So I want to go back and kind of reread those just to make sure I know why or how he impacted the field of psychology. Pavlov, one influential study that set into motion many subsequent psychological studies about behavior and learning is Pavlov's dog study. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist, conducted the study in 1901. So again, Ivan Pavlov helped to set in motion psychology as a science. Pavlov had already spent years studying the digestive system of dogs and therefore knew that dogs naturally salivate whenever they see food. This is not something dogs learn, it is a normal involuntary reflex. But what he also noticed was that the dogs would salivate whenever they saw or heard something they had repeatedly associated with food delivery in the past. And then it talks about an example. Oh, and then the next paragraph says that you could say Pavlov accidentally discovered what would later come to be known as classical conditioning. But like other psychologists of his time, he wanted to scientifically prove his theory. Okay, so let's go back down. In what way did Pavlov impact the field of psychology? So let's restate the question first. So to my text box. Okay, Pavlov impacted the field of psychology by setting in motion psychology as a science and then my second part, I'm going to say how he conducted experiments to test his theories. He let me go to the next line. He set up experiments to test his theories. I really liked what it said. Right here, let me see what it says. He wanted to scientifically prove his theory. Yeah. Okay. So, and I can even use that right here as a citing evidence because that's what we've been learning too. So I'm going to put that here. He wanted to scientifically prove his theories. Oops, there we go. And now I used a quote too, yay! Okay, so you are now going to do 3 through 9, but remember you're just choosing 4 of these questions. You don't have to do all of them. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. So you have plenty to choose from. You just choose which ones you want to do, and then make sure you submit that for your work completion for me to read over. All right, of course, reach out if you have any questions. You can come see me during office hours if need be. Otherwise, have a great day.